Hi Natalie, welcome to the podcast. Really good to have you on.
Hi, thank you for asking me. Very exciting.
I mean, we sort of muddled around a bit getting this arranged, and then we finally arranged to talk, and it's on your birthday.
I know. 45 years young today.
It's a classic. It's a classic birthday, the 45. I mean, I've got quite a lot of 45s over my shoulder. It's a good dad joke there for you. But
I know. Do you know what? It actually feels like a really good birthday because I think like 45, you just don't care anymore, which is a really good feeling.
Yeah, and you might, you might possibly.
I've been to the gym. I've worked out, and because that's like my new obsession now. And I've had cake at like 10 in the morning, which was nice. And nice coffee, and now I'm like just back in the studio for the day. Good birthday.
I think birthdays are for cake on the treadmill, aren't they? That would be just like living the life.
I stay away from that treadmill. It's the root of all evil.
So have you gone to the studio today just to have this conversation, or did you? Are you?
No, I come here every day, so it's like
day, including your birthday.
I've got like it's like an open studio, so it's kind of like open to the public as well. That I share like with my sister, and then my auntie's just got involved as well, and then I've got like, because I do picture framing and large format printing as well, so I've got like a workshop. So it's quite nice really. It's like I can do a bit of everything while I'm here and also still kind of have people in and out. Except the only time it's a bit awkward is if you're in the middle of a painting and it's not going well, and then you're like, oh Christ.
Well, I was going to ask, what's that like? I was going to ask, what's that like, having an open space where, that's all great if you're having a bit of downtime and it's nice to have people milling around. It's not quite so solitary. But if you're really in the zone and somebody comes in and asks if there's free parking outside or something, and
or can they have recycling bags? Get that a lot because I'm in like an old, I'm in an old council building, so that happens a lot. Or recently, because there used to be a library here, and that's moved to another venue, and obviously so people were used to coming here to do certain things. So like, had a very irate woman the other week wanted me to sign her blue badge. To be honest, after about 25 minutes, I just thought, I might just sign it. I, Natalie Chapman, give you a blue badge as of today.
It'd be great to see if that would be valid for her for the next 12 months.
I mean, I feel like it might. I'm in the building. That's got to give me some, bit of an edge.
Oh yeah, it's an ex-council building, so it's technically it's forever consecrated ground, I suppose. You could sign anything.
I could. Actually, let's not put this out there in case I do get loads of people, right? I don't want to start becoming a registrar for births or something.
Births, artist, picture framer, births, desk marriages, recycling bags.
Everybody welcome. It's a funny one, that whole, I mean, I suppose with me, I'm quite used to, I've got 4 kids. I was a single parent for a lot of the time. So I've always had to paint with other things going on. So it's not like I haven't really had that, sort of privilege of a studio that I'm in and I'm in the zone and I'm doing my thing. It's like I'm just doing it whilst, I don't know, making a fish finger sandwich or something. It's like I've always had to kind of do it like that. So it doesn't really, it's not really any different for me having an open space as to if I'm painting at home and the kids are like, oh, can we do this? Or, whatever. So over the years, it's always been like that. So I suppose having this type of space is not that different for me. I mean, it probably would do other people's heads in, but I don't know. I'm quite into the whole kind of hustle and bustle of it all, really, I suppose.
Do you think that I mean, that's really interesting. Do you think like having that sort of noise around you and in your head has become part of the process, or was it always that way? Have you always like sort of have you ever had
I
opportunities
haven't
where you've had
actually had any time on my own as of yet in the last 45 years. So I don't know yet. If it maybe like when they've all left home, and then we'll have to redo this podcast. And then you're like, so, and I'll be like, God, I wish I had a studio on my own all those years. I don't know. I suppose, yeah,
perhaps you'll go mad?
it's a weird one, isn't it? I left home when I was quite young. My sister then came to live with me. She's 10 years younger. So I was like 19 in a flat with a 9-year-old. So I haven't ever, I suppose I've been a child and then moved into I suppose like a caring role or a supporting role, and haven't actually had that time where I'm not, where I'm not that yet. So I suppose I don't know the answer to that really. Maybe when I get to that point.
Have you ever gone through periods where you thought, oh, this is just too hard, it's too much, I can't create this work with all no.
It's the only thing that I like. I'm obsessive about it. You know, I paint every day, even if I'm starting late at night, you know, because I can't, I suppose I just can't not. It's how I deal with my daily life, which is probably hard for my kids because I remember watching that documentary on Paula Rego years and years ago. It's called like storytelling and something. I think it was like a BBC documentary, and her kids are obviously a lot older, and then they were sort of asking, the kids were interviewed in that, and they were like, yeah, well, she was just doing her art all the time. And I think, I probably am a bit like that, and that's probably quite frustrating for them. And having stuff in the house all the time, like creative stuff everywhere, but they have had the opportunity then to grow up, to be able to be, if they want to just paint a t-shirt or whatever, the stuff is there, they just go and do it, so it's like, I don't know, there's two sides to everything, isn't there? But yeah, I suppose I'm quite obsessive about it. I feel like it's the process for me is how I deal with everything that's ever happened in my life, is to just make work about it, and then that's far better than 15 years ago when I used to drink 10 pints.
Yeah, well, we could do a whole podcast talking about like getting into your 40s and leaving that kind of neural processing behind. We could do a whole series on that. I wonder if there's a gap
Definitely
in the market.
Yeah. There might be.
It's a conversation I have so often, but maybe we'll come back to that. But when I interviewed Bedwyr Williams on way back in the mists of time now in the first episode, and he talked, this is in the context of talking about his own sort of background and biography, and he said that the real privilege for creative people is as well as the sort of social political conversations about privilege with money, backgrounds and opportunity and class and things like that. But he said the real privilege is having, I think his words were like having that eccentric aunt who lives up on the hill and creates art, and having that person in your family or that person in your life when you're a child who lets you see that an artistic life or a cultured life is something that you can have. And that's what you're talking about, really. You're talking about, your kids, I'm sure, because all kids get annoyed by their parents, right? It doesn't really matter whether you're an artist or an executive at a bank.
Very true.
The kids are going to get frustrated with you and find you lame and frustrating. And but what you've been giving them access to all their lives is the privilege which not all kids have, the privilege of understanding that an artistic life is something that can be had.
Yeah, and actually, that comes from, I was really lucky, in lots of respects in that area in my life. So when I was younger, I had a really good sort of opportunities. So my granddad was an artist. He used to paint around the valleys his whole life, quite successful, quite a well-known artist. His name was George Chapman. And, we kind of just used to go, and we didn't have a TV. We lived in a house with no electric for a long time. So we would just draw, create, paint, whatever. And then after he passed away, I got an opportunity to go on, they were like social services activity groups. So my family, my parents had suffered with like addiction issues, and there was some mental health things going on, and we as children got access to this group on a Saturday where an amazing youth worker called Chris Robinson would come and pick us all up and take us off, and we had access to art and music. So like I still play and sing in a band now, and that's like 35 years on. And that creative avenue was always, it was not a kind of like an add-on. It was the thing. So like nobody ever, I mean, especially in the family, like, even though there was all of that other stuff going on, everybody made art. My aunties, my uncles, my dad, my grandparents, and nobody pressurized me to do anything else. Even when I was not doing very well at school, I'd kind of disengaged with school, especially with everything that was going on. My dad had gone in and out of rehab a lot of times, and I didn't really feel like I fitted in the education system. It was quite challenging to be there. So I spent about a year or so in a foster place, and I just totally disengaged from school. But during that time, I still kept being creative because it was already in me. It was already instilled in me that was like, you always do that, like no matter what's going on, that's like your outlet, that's your thing. So I was really lucky to be able to have that as like a core part of my childhood. So it meant that regardless of everything else that went on, I always had that to go back to, even though there was times, like when me and my sister first moved out, it was really difficult because it's like, well, I was 19 and she was 9, and I didn't have any children of my own at that point. I didn't really know how to look after a 9-year-old, but we were on benefits. They used to give us £24 a week. We lived in this horrendous flat, which if the people upstairs went in the shower, then all the water would run down the walls. So we'd have to knock the room, turn your shower off. But even then, it was nothing. That didn't matter because we just we would make stuff or draw stuff. Or I remember I've still got some photos of me and her doing a photo shoot where we'd dressed up. We were in some kind of punky clothes or whatever. So I think it's if you've got that core belief that being creative is good for you, then no matter what is going on in your life, you always have that to tap into. So you can always return to that. Even when things are utterly terrible, you have an outlet. You have something that you can revisit, and it will make things feel better. If that makes sense.
Do you think, in some ways, obviously things have changed for kids now in terms of just the nature of creativity. But do you think, there is a question of accessibility there, really, isn't there? You're talking about not having a TV, and yet creativity is so connected for the younger generation to the digital experience now that they kind of need or feel they need, or society tells them they need all of this equipment in order to be a participant in their generation, this generational society, if you like.
Yeah, and it's just utter, you know, I won't swear. It's utter rubbish. You know, it's like it's craziness. You know, like you need nothing to be I'm not one of these artists who's like, oh, I use the finest quality materials and get all hung up in that. You know, that's some people's practice, and I'm totally supportive of that. You know, you do you and I'll do me and all the rest of it. But it's in no way relevant to the work. Like I remember, I think it was there's a 3-part documentary on the Sensations exhibition, and I think there's a part in it where I think it's Gary Hume who talks about how he was like, at the time I was just like finding bits of board and old household paints from skips and just painting, and you know, did those like hospital corridor ones, I think it was, I can't remember, but you know, like that's creativity at its core. Like we don't need anything else other than your emotions, your ideas, and an outlet, and that can be whatever you want it to be, you know. And I think that's what needs to be pushed more, you know, like there should be more just focus on that, you know. I think in general there is, you know, there's less and less focus on the arts. Like I've got, you know, my eldest is 23, my youngest is 8. I've had children that have gone through the education system recently, and you know, there's a lot of issues, like so many issues. I've done some stuff where I've gone into schools and I'm like, right, where's your art stuff? They're like, it's like a few crusty old paintbrushes, and it's like, and you think, hang on a minute, we've got like probably the biggest mental health challenges in young people at the moment going on, and we're not in any which way focusing on all the things that would support that, you know, like, and having a creative outlet is so key to being able to handle emotions, express them in a positive way, being able to talk about them. Like, if I was to sort of sit down and go through, like, a lot of my paintings are about experiences that have happened to me. If I was to just sit there and be forced to maybe talk about them in a very cold, sort of light of day way, I would find that quite traumatic, probably on a daily basis. But when I can put those things into a painting, put that narrative, I can reimagine the story slightly, I can make tweaks to it, I can use it to sort of, I suppose, change my experience with it. And then I can talk to people about my work, which is actually me talking about myself. Which is very self-indulgent, really. You know, it's that kind of thing, isn't it? And then somebody can go like, oh God, yeah, that happened to me. And you know, and it can like spark conversations. And I think those are the really important things that happen, because if you don't have an outlet, you don't have a way of actually processing your own narrative and dealing with it in a positive way, then where does it go? That stuff's got to go somewhere. And most of the time, it will go into something negative, because it's too much to deal with. So unless you can find a positive way, then it will take over you.
Wales Arts Review is back, and it's a podcast. Or rather, the new Wales Arts Review is being built before your very eyes around the central column of my conversations with some of the most interesting and vital cultural figures working today. But for us to survive and grow this time, we very much need your help. If you like what we're doing, like what we stand for, then like our posts, and most importantly, subscribe. The more subscribers to our Substack newsletter and YouTube channel, the better placed we will be to grow and pay writers to tackle the most pressing cultural subjects of the day. Via Substack, you can become a paid subscriber and gain access to exclusive content and an ever-growing Wales Arts Review archive. And by hitting the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, not only do you let the platform know you'd like to see more of our stuff, but you increase the chances of us drawing down revenue from ads. All that goes back into Wales Arts Review to help us grow and improve. We need your support. Press those buttons and then go and enjoy our stuff. It's all for you anyway.
How much has your processes changed over the years? What was your
Nothing.
Nothing has changed.
Like,
what
zero development in that sense. No.
I should. Development is the wrong word, I suppose, isn't it? It's like, but when you were first creating work, even as a child, but when you were creating work and maybe recognizing that this was a serious business for you, that it was something, I don't mean like commercial or career wise, but it was something that was for the rest of your life, was going to be something that was central to your.
I think that probably happened at college, to be honest. Like, obviously, as I didn't really do, I kind of left school, at 15, with not really much other than a massive feeling of not being good enough. And then I had a couple of years out where I was kind of working and, trying to survive. I had a tiny little flat. So I was, 16, and I had a tiny little flat that I lived in, and drank far too much beer at the pub. I sort of was trying to just survive that kind of year. And then I was like 19 and I fell pregnant, and I thought, right, God, my whole life is gonna kind of that's gonna happen. And then that first child was stillborn, and it absolutely shocked me to the core, because I'd never even heard of that. I just kind of assumed you get pregnant and you have the baby at the end of it. And I sort of remember going to the hospital, and I was like full term, and I remember them saying, no, you have to go through the birth and everything. And I was thinking, what? It like absolutely shook me to the core, sort of thing. So that was a really, really difficult experience. And then I remember thinking after that, like, this can't be for nothing. I have to do something. I need something. And I had no real qualifications or anything. So I phoned up the college and asked them for an interview. And I remember, like, my dad took me there in his Volvo, and we rocked up, and I sort of gathered together a few sketches and things like that, just sort of random stuff that I'd be doing. And then I went and had this interview, and because I had no qualifications or anything, they said they'd give me a 3-month trial. So this was in the September. They said they'd give me until Christmas, and if they felt I could manage the workload, then I could carry on. And I walked out there and I just cried my eyes out. So it felt like a really big opportunity. But also it felt like a change, it's like, okay, I've got to grab this. So I started in the September, and I think that's the first time I realized how work can help you process things. So I spent the next 2 years, just literally pouring my heart out into my work and making anything and everything. Some of it was, God, awful. It's like horrendous work. But then there were pieces in there that I still look back now and think, God, that was bloody brilliant. And it is probably in the bin now somewhere, I don't know. And I was really lucky. I had an amazing group of tutors. So it was like I suddenly felt like I'd arrived at something, and there was hope, and there was all these things. And so I suppose that, college really was the first time that I really made that connection of creativity, healing, expression, all of those things, and where you can use your own narrative in your work. You know, I suppose up to that point, I'd kind of been playing around with like, you know, just like reproducing images, like, you know, playing around with paint or playing around with charcoal, but not bringing anything of myself to it as such. So it's like that was the first experience I had, and I actually did really well at college. I got really great marks, and it was just that I suppose finally I was in an environment that supported me and helped me to grow and helped me to believe. And it just takes one person to make you feel like that, you know, and that can change your whole narrative. Like I never felt that I had that at school, you know. It was always like, oh, she's from that family, or, you know, it was that kind of thing. And so, you know, I live in a really rural area. You know, my dad got out of rehab once and then a few weeks later rammed it with his Volvo, and it was like front page of the Cambrian News. And I had to rock up at school. I was like, oh, is your dad like ramming the rehab building with his car? I was like, yeah. Yeah, it was. You know.
No.
Oh God, it was hilarious. Do you know what? I always laugh about that, 'cause afterwards, bless him, he's unfortunately, you know, addiction is a really difficult thing, and he died about 7 years ago from that. But I just think we had a right laugh after that, because obviously he was arrested and charged with criminal damage, but there was no damage to the Volvo. Hellish good cars.
Volvo
estate, you can't go wrong.
The Swedes, man, they're from another planet. What was I going to lead up from that?
That's not an advert for people to buy Volvos to ram rehab centres, by the way.
But if they were thinking of ramming something, Volvo would definitely be
Volvo would be the car, but I'm in no way commissioned by Volvo to say this.
No. I'm sure Volvo would be the first people to be relieved.
Yes.
That you're putting that disclaimer up. I have many conversations nowadays about, I mean, you're talking about the importance of your college experience, and how, I mean, that university is well publicized and well commented upon, that universities are sort of in a trajectory of becoming just training colleges for industry. So that's part of why many universities, Exeter being in the news recently, many universities are sort of undermining and cancelling and jettisoning their actually profitable humanities courses because industry finance, you know, I'm not talking about factory work or anything, but you know, certain industries are not interested in any of those things, and so they're in relationships with universities that are getting rid of those things. And I think, you know, do you think, you know, with your kids and stuff, they're getting those opportunities? I mean, we'll come on to talk about class and opportunity and what those things mean. But do you think kids today are getting opportunities like that? I mean, I cannot imagine now, maybe, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I can't imagine now a kid going up to a college or university with no qualifications and then saying, well, I tell you what, let's give you a go and see how you do. Maybe if you, I don't even know if they exist anymore, but maybe if you were trying to get on a foundation course or something, you know, they're a bit more flexible. But it just seems to me that those sorts of opportunities, that sort of flexibility was more part of the system, whereas now bureaucracy dominates everything and nobody has any say in anything. It's just, well, what does the handbook say? The handbook says, unfortunately, not. I
think, unfortunately, stuff like that is across the board. You know, when I was talking earlier about having that opportunity with social services to go out on those Saturday groups, you know, like, Christ, you would not, that could not happen now. And that would not happen now because of, you know, things like health and safety and things like that gone mad. You know, like, I think this is the problem with a lot of things, isn't it? It's like, yes, I understand, you know, there's certain things that had to move forward, but then also there's certain things like now, I mean, I've just had it with, so like one of my daughters has had a really rough last year at school, and in the end I decided this is not the right environment for her. Basically it all came about because she was 15, she's 16 now. She was 15, having, being very good at school, continued at school, but she put a box dye on her hair, which was like a red box dye colour. And that was it. They removed her education for 8 weeks. So she was in what they call NKIL, which the word is like, I don't even, which
NKIL.
NKIL is like a detention, basically.
NKIL.
NKIL, yeah. And so she was in there for this whole period of time during the run up to her GCSEs. They removed her education. And
because she died.
Yeah, because she had dyed her hair red. And my issue was, you're having children in your school with bleach blonde hair. That's not their natural colour. And the headmaster kept saying to me, if you bleach her hair, we won't have a problem. She can return to education. And so I fought this. And every time I tried, I noticed very quickly. So I went to like the children's commissioner, local MPs, different areas. And I noticed very quickly that actually the school had a lot of power. It was really like everybody was kind of coming back, this is a school issue. And I was like, well, I've kind of exhausted that avenue. Anyway, to cut a long story short, after the battle of about 8 weeks, I ended up getting the governors to agree to reinstate her education, which I was super grateful for, but also to get an open consultation, which had over 800 responses. And in the end, he had to withdraw the policy, reinstate Honey's education, and blah, blah, blah. But by that time, she had missed pretty much 2 months of schooling, being shut in a room, not even allowed down to the canteen to get her own lunch.
Dyeing her hair. That's absolutely disgusting.
For using a box dye. And it's very quickly shown me what the system is. We're expecting, young people to make positive choices for themselves, be responsible for their actions, and blah, 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 yet they're in a system that is not that, and I think that there's, I just think that there needs to be a rehaul with all of these kind of things, there should be opportunities. Not everybody can get along in that form of education. We should be approaching this in a much more alternative way. And then by doing that, by bringing, there should be an option for a creative pathway as well. Everything in this world, at some point or another, an artist has been part of it. But we don't seem to have we seem to have less and less appreciation of that, and support of that. So then it becomes really difficult. And especially, when you're kind of in maybe a more rural area, it's quite hard. There's not necessarily lots of big art scenes that you can get involved in. So it becomes less and less. So you can't actually see a vision for yourself or a pathway for yourself. Okay, well, I really love art and I want to do that, but how do I get there? That you can't see the steps ahead of you. I think, you have to have such determination and maybe as well a bit of a chip on your shoulder. Do you know what I mean?
Do you think you had a bit of a chip on your shoulder when you got to college?
100%. 100%. I felt
that
totally
surprises me. I don't know. I wasn't getting that from your story so far.
I felt totally, I suppose, I felt totally outed at school, if you like. I had lots of experience where, I had one experience where I I went on a French exchange that my gran had paid for me to go on, and I was so excited about that because I hardly ever had any of those opportunities because, you know, my parents didn't. We were living on benefits, and those opportunities weren't possible. And my grandmother had paid for me to go on this French exchange. And so I went there, I was like super chuffed. And then I was waiting for her to come over. And I was living with my dad at the time. My parents had got a divorce, and my dad had been in rehab and come out, and things were, you know, feeling, you know, maybe a bit more positive. So I was kind of excited about this girl to come and stay. And then, the week before, there'd been not really any communication, and I thought this is really odd. And I got this letter, and so I took it up to my French teacher in the lesson, and I said, "Oh, could you help me read this, because it says that she's not coming to stay." And then she just, in front of the whole class, said, "Well, for goodness sake, has nobody told you? You know, she's not staying with you. Your family's not suitable, so she's going to stay with somebody else." You know, like, all of those kind of things, they build and build, and you do have a chip on your shoulder. And then you think, why should I engage with this system that is actually just kind of making me feel, you know, all of the things that I already kind of felt. You know, it's very difficult if you grow up with a parent with addiction and it's kind of public knowledge because you're a child. So you're sort of not meant to talk about it because there's lots of things that are happening at home maybe that are kind of, you don't quite understand them, but you do know they should be a secret. And so those kind of things build on, you know. If the focus was kind of maybe a more creative focus in education, then, you know, maybe there'd be a lot more people with a lot more outlets, and things might, you know, become different for young people, especially at the moment with all the kind of heavy pressure to be academic, and as if your GCSEs are going to rule the rest of your life. You know, Christ, you're 15 taking them, like, you know, without being thingy. They don't rule the rest of your life. If you don't get them and then you get to 20 and you think, oh, actually, I did want to become a doctor. Well, you can redo them. You know, there's a lot of options.
I remember I was doing my A-levels, and our friend's mother died. She had a brain hemorrhage. She'd been ill for a long time, but she died just as we were coming up to doing our A-levels. And our teacher, who's also a deputy head, who was great, and we all like really looked up to him. He was, you know, one of those teachers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Very inspiring, you know. And he gave us a little speech when our friend, obviously we all knew because we were quite a close little class, and he said, look, you know, you can't let this is the most important thing you're ever going to do in your life, these exams. You can't let this like derail you. And and we were all like, yeah. And no disrespect to him as a teacher, but as the years have gone on, I've just thought, what a load of bullshit. What an absolute load of bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying it had any effect on how much any of us were there for him while he was going through that. I don't remember there ever being any sort of feeling or accusation that we'd kind of let him slip by or anything like that. In fact, when we finished our A-levels, a bunch of us, we all went to Dublin on the piss, and we took him. You know, we sort of paid for his flight and all that. We all chipped in, so I think we were there. But I think about that often, just as you go through life and you come up against the system more and more, and you realize that the system is essentially created for people to put their backs up against each other and protect each other, in the sense that there's strength in numbers. Not that the system doesn't care about anybody. Nobody in the system cares for each other. It's just about strength in numbers, and you being treated that way in school and being made to feel ashamed of yourself because the French exchange student, no doubt, this had all happened without their knowledge and without their, you know, they hadn't made that decision themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when I think back, like, if you're the system and you've made that decision as the system, then where was the support? Where is the support to guide you through that decision? Because if the system cared, there would be a support system in place. It's a funny thing, I don't like when I felt so proud of my daughter. She stood her ground and we stood our ground, and now the policy is different. People are allowed to dye their hair, but obviously at what cost? At the cost of her education. That's what the cost is, because it takes somebody to step out of that, and it takes somebody to make a stance and fight that corner. But not everybody wants to do that, because they know that actually it's them who's going to, I say to her all the time, but what you did is incredible, because you've changed it now. So like when your little sister's 15, if she does put a hair dye on her hair, she's not going to be stuck in a room unable to have her education because of what you've done. And those are amazing things, but she can't. That's really hard for her to see it as it is now, because actually she just lost out on 2 months, and then there was nothing put in place. There was no catch-up sessions. There was no support put in place. It was like, it was a really sad situation, actually. And I just think, yes, it was great that we fought for that, and I did have my Erin Brockovich moment where I was like, yeah. But then very quickly it was like, oh yeah, but so now she's in that position that I was in, where she's got a place in college. Her work is outstanding. She's an incredible artist, brilliant, excellent at anything she puts her mind at. But she's having to start college at the low level because she doesn't have the GCSEs. So now she's got to start, in effect, in a place where, and they've said, oh, well, actually, we think she should be in level 3. So we'll start her off and then we can move her up. But that's because the system wouldn't allow her to just go in at level 3 because it's not geared up for them.
And we come back to that bureaucratic idea of like just people in positions in institutions just going, well, let's just see how this works, and we can see what the situation is, so let's just bend the rules, or the rules are there to be malleable and there to be bent, and now they're not. They're rigid, and it's the sort of executive class removing the humanity from the institutions that are supposed to be there to serve people and look after people and educate people and create and help people become better at being members of society, when in fact that's not what the institutions do, because they become so rigid in this pursuit of eroding the idea of human error. We're actually just eroding humanity in general.
Yeah, and but in doing that, it
human.
just erodes everything. It's
How does that sort of thing then? How does that find its way into your work? Was there a moment, because you have such a distinctive style? Is there a moment in your development? I'll use that word again. But was there a moment that you can pinpoint where you thought, oh, I see what my thing is. I see, because your work is full of characters. It's full of color. It's full of like potential, isn't it? It's about the potential of what is in the eyes of the character, or the two characters that are not interacting, that quite often are sort of looking out, breaking the fourth wall, like you've sort of the viewers walked in on something. Was there a moment when you realized this is my voice, this is how I understand to articulate what I'm feeling?
Happened in uni, and it was like, so I went to university much later on. I had 3 kids at home at that point, on my own. And my best mate, who's been my best mate for years and years, we met on the college bus. And I saw her get on it like Abrath. I'd got on in Abrath when I was living with my flat that the water was coming down the walls. She got on in Abrath, and funnily enough, she'd put a box dye on her hair, this bleach stuff, and it actually burnt the top of her hair. So she literally looked like a cockerel or some kind of funny chicken. And I remember her getting on the coach with like these massive flared cord trousers and like a grunge shirt. And I was like, God, that girl is for me. I know we're going to hang out. And so she's still my best friend now, however many years later. And anyway, fast forward, we kind of went through, we used to go to a young parents group together and all sorts. And then after when I had the three of them at home, I just, again, a bit like that pull when I was at college, I was like, oh God, I need to do something. I need to break free from this. I'd been in a relationship that wasn't great and that had broken down. And so it was like, right, I need to do something. And she said, I'll look after your kids. Just go and do it. And I was like, Christ. So I went to uni. And she used to watch my kids for me. And then the first year was great because it was just like workshops and I was so hungry for it. And I was like absorbing everything. And then second year, I did it over part-time as well. So it was, but second year was funny. I'd kind of so I absorbed all the workshop stuff, but I wasn't quite brave enough maybe to sort of connect like I'd done in college, the two together, because obviously I'd had a sort of 10-year gap in between where I'd had kids and that. And then, so I made some really shit work second year, which is, God, if anybody's got any of it, just bin that. And then as I was coming to the end of my second year, I'd started making these tiny little, so my mother had a really difficult childhood. She'd brought up in, social housing, and then in the care system and had been to multiple children's homes. And, but there's always been like this because she's brought up in quite a religious household. So she's always had religious iconography up in the house. And so I started making these I'd looked at Mexican miracle paintings, these little paintings that you can hold in your hand and they have a narrative and they're just these beautiful little things. And so I sort of started to be inspired by that. So I was making portraits of her, with all these sort of slightly Catholic icons, I suppose, in a way. And then I suddenly realized that I'd hit it. I was like, okay, I know how to marry the two, and I suppose like painting was the vessel for that, but I just started to make that connection again. And so then those tiny paintings then became bigger and bigger and bigger until they became the thing. And so by the time I'd got to third year, I had a great tutor called Kath Fairgrave, who's just brilliant, like really brilliant in like helping me and guiding me with my narrative, but also in terms of the technicality of how I'd approach that with paint, and kind of supported me throughout. And so, and then I think, it just evolved from there, but that was definitely, I kind of love that thing of, I don't know if you've ever watched it. There's a Grayson Perry documentary. It's called like Who Are We? And he does these portraits of people. And he did a part of, I've forgotten his name, but the MP who made his wife take the speeding fine.
Chris Hume, was it? Chris.
And I think it was him. He did this part that was kind of meant to represent him, and he'd made this stamp of tiny little penis stamp, and then he decorated this pot. And you know, to the sort of the eye when you walked in, it just looked like this beautifully decorated pot. And then in the unveiling, they unveil it, and it's like, oh my god, this is so beautiful. Like, look at it. And then as you get close, it's like, is there a dick on that? And then Grace's parents like, yeah, because actually I just thought you were a bit of a dick. And I just remember thinking when I watched those, there was some other ones, like there was another one that he did of a couple, a husband and wife, and the husband has suffered dementia. And so he had all of these photographs, and then he'd cut them up into these sort of shards. They were like quite sharp, and then he decaled them onto a pot, and so it was like this sort of, and they were sheltering from a storm of all these shards of memories. But it was beautiful. First off, you walk in the room and you're like, wow, that's a gorgeous piece, but you can't really tell what it is until you get closer and closer, and you're like, oh, it's a bit dark. It's got something else going on. And I think that's always intrigued me as an artist. Like, I don't want to offer it all up in the sense like the color and the decorative and all of those types of things. I want to be that first like impact of like, oh God, that's got beautiful colors, or, you know, beautiful marks or whatever. And then as you kind of think, you're like, oh yeah, but it's a bit, is what's good. You know, it's that kind of thing, like layers. That's what I'm thinking. There's got to be layers.
Yeah, I think it's as you get drawn more to the central figure in a lot of your work, you get drawn more to them, and then to the expression, and then to their eyes. And I think of it as I was looking through your work recently, prepping for this. I was thinking a lot of it you could call like the art of disillusionment. People look very disillusioned in your work, and then talking to you feels like that a lot of your strength comes from a pool of disillusionment with things. Would that be fair?
100%. I mean, without that, I don't know what I'd be. It's kind of like, yeah, I suppose. And also when I look back, you know, I think as well, like I work a lot from photographs, old photographs, sort of like 80s photographs mainly, because I was born in 81. And so I'm really interested in that kind of aesthetic as well. There's something in that I like to try to play out. But also, I think, you know, there's a strength in the mundane, you know, that daily grind, that resilience, that kind of keep going, you know, but also that sort of longing and knowing that there's something more to come. And I think that's how I feel in my life, and have felt in my life for a lot of the time, you know, like I'm getting through it, but I know there's this bigger stuff coming, you know, and it's like that kind of, and also a lot of the people in my life, like, you know, like I've said a bit earlier about my mum having that, you know, when I think about that, you know, she was in children's homes and, you know, I mean, there's stuff that's come out in the news recently that is still not great, you know. I'm not sure we've moved on how we should, you know. And like I watched that one full documentary that Michael Sheen didn't he? It's like a Kids in Care or something like. And I think, you know, when I think about her and that system and that, you know, just to still be alive and be here and be trying your very best to function every day is gutsy, and that is something to be celebrated. You know, like I said before, you know, my friend, we went to our young parents group together. She was 17 having her first son. I was 21 having my eldest daughter, and it was like, you know, we felt we were both living in social housing, you know, and like that feeling of, oh God, society's sort of looking at us. We don't really know what we're doing. We're kids with kids kind of thing. And, but I wouldn't have gone to uni without her. She's now training to be a nurse, and she's an incredible person, those type of things I want to celebrate. That's to me, that's strength, that's resilience, that's determination. To be single parent at 17 and bring up your child in social housing like she did, and now to be 40 and still flipping going for it, like, actually I'm gonna do this and become this. It's like, those are the things that I want to celebrate in my work. And also there's a lot of those stories in Wales, that I don't, I'm not saying I'm the only person doing that. God, and there's lots of people making work about all different sorts of things, but it's quite difficult to get those scenes out there in galleries in Wales. We sort of, it's interesting. It's like, I suppose somebody asked me the other day, I'd had a show in Carmarthen Castle, and I did a talk with it, and one of the questions was, my show was titled Breadline Britain, the Cymru edition. And then somebody asked me, oh, but how do you feel about that? Because people, from South Wales might not want to be seen as on the breadline kind of thing, And it's like, it's still that thing of shame and I think, I don't see anything shameful in the fact that I spent 20 years, living on benefit system, trying to care for myself and my sister and do the best that we could at the time with what was available to us. I don't see why I should not celebrate that and try to sort of, hush that down or I think these are the things that's what has to change, isn't it? If you're sharing these stories, then, people can see, okay, maybe I can be an artist and tell my story. Can I walk into a gallery and look at work? If I'm on benefits, am I accepted into a gallery? Those are all things that are important to me, as well as just, making the work.
Do you find, because obviously in the last 10, 20 years, or 10 years, 20 years, there's been a real sort of vocal push for, in inverted commas, accessibility and access for people from different backgrounds, for working class people. Do you see that in effect, or is that largely just the usual people, the usual gatekeepers, the usual executive class just making what they think are the right sounds, but nothing really is changing? Do you still think it's difficult for somebody like you from your background to get onto platforms and to get your work seen, and then when it is seen, to have some slightly more respectful questions than, do you think people in South Wales will be annoyed that you're calling them poor? When, I mean, like you say, like people on benefits should be the ones who are ashamed, rather than the rest of society who has allowed society to fail them in so many various ways, from school days to not providing any get out for them in terms of a working environment.
Yeah, I think, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because there's so many elements to it, and there's such a, I've had some amazing support lately. I mean, the National Library of Wales has been incredible. They've bought some of my work. They've commissioned me to make a piece for their collection. And, I can definitely see the push to readdress the imbalance in certain areas from them. I mean, commercial galleries, there's no change there. I don't see that. That's a whole different bag. Like, I think that's a really difficult area. I've been really lucky to have a great support from Canvas in Cardigan. I think you had Anne on, Anne Cakebread on. She's been brilliant. Like, so supportive of my work, like from the off. But there's not, it's still really, really difficult if you are from, working class background or, whatever, living on benefit. I think it's like the hardest thing ever to be able to continue to make work, to find opportunities to, I know, like, there's lots of things that I do, which is like, enter lots of open calls and various things like that. But like those things are expensive. Like if I was still, luckily I'm not in that position anymore and life has changed a lot for me. But if I was still in what I was in, when I was living in my council house on benefits, how would I have made that possible? It takes everything. And that's what I mean about, I suppose, like, in a way, having that chip on my shoulder has probably been the one thing that's enabled me to push through, because I've been so determined that is not my story. I'm not going to stay where they want me to be. Like that whole thing of the system, like I'm smashing that system.
We're sort of coming towards an end, and there's so much else I wanted to talk to you about. So I'm going to sort of see if I can just quickly approach some subjects. And what's your relationship with wallpaper? Because I love your relationship with wallpaper.
I know.
I want some of the wallpaper from your paintings in my house.
It's quite obsessive, really. I think, like, so when I think it comes from a lot of things. It's that thing of the pattern, that was talking about with the Grace and Perry, that kind of lure of the, but also you can put a lot into a wallpaper without people realizing. And it kind of supports, like that. I suppose it is that thing of like, I find it a lot with, social housing and things like that. You kind of always trying to make your house stand out from other houses, so this almost like this kind of, somebody told me the other day about, apparently now it's not the decor, it's the front door. So if you're in social housing, and you want to sort of display your wealth or your, you change your door, which I thought that was quite interesting. Somebody told me that because we were talking about the fashion show that's on at the museum in Cardiff at the minute. And so we were talking about the social housing and changing of doors. And I suppose it's kind of similar, I can put a lot of things into, like, I've got a painting that's called How to Prune a Husband and Other Life Lessons. And in that painting, I've got forget-me-nots on the wallpaper, but then I've got dying tulips on the table, and, the woman's face is made up of the same colours as the wallpaper. So it's about that thing of, sort of losing yourself in a difficult relationship and becoming part of the wallpaper, part of the furniture. So I think those kind of things, pattern for me is so much more. It's a way of adding more narrative into the work, I suppose.
Yeah, I think, there's so much going on, interplay between symbolism and color and what's going on. How much kickback do you get about smoking in your paintings?
A lot.
I thought you might.
And the thing is, I only smoke in paintings now. I gave up smoking like 10 years ago, and now I only smoke in paintings. But like,
Does that help? If you ever feel like a cigarette, you just think, I'll just paint one?
I'll just paint one. But it's a funny one, isn't it? And I never realised how, stuff like that can really... I get two camps, get people like, I love it. That's so us, or that's so my friend so-and-so having a fag, and, and kind of like... And then I get other people who can't stand it, But I'd much rather create a reaction from my work than have no reaction, And I'm not here. I'm not in this world to beautify things and to put the frillies on. I want it to be honest. Otherwise, what am I doing it for? I'm telling stories, and if in that story there's a fag, it will be in the painting, love.
I love your work, even though I called it the art of disillusionment before, your work, obviously like you, has a great sense of humor. There's a real humor to the poses and the gazing, that breaking of the fourth wall is always quite intoxicating, but also quite sort of, I don't know, challenging. It's like, but in that way that like a funny person would be challenging. But I love the relationship between the titles and the work. It sets you up for something. How do you come up with a title and think, well, that'll be perfect for that painting that hasn't got a title yet? Or do you paint something and go, well, now I have to work? Or do you have like a little note? I could imagine you having like a little notebook of phrases that occur to you as you're on the bus and stuff, and then you go,
a book of titles.
Perfect one.
I have a book of titles, and then I make the work for the titles. I suppose I've always had, like, my sketchbook is never like really full of like finished painting ideas. It starts off with a word or a story or something that happened or something that somebody has said, or kind of, there's a great guy called Greg who collects Welsh art, and he bought a piece of mine a while ago, and it was a piece I'd made about somebody that I'd been in a relationship with, and he'd kind of never really apologized for anything. So I made this piece of work, which is a portrait of him. I'd sort of turned him into a bit of, like a young farmer's sort of cowboy. There's quite a popular thing at the moment, being a bit slightly cowboy.
Yeah.
So I made this, and on the hat I put "I'm sorry," and then I titled the painting "I'm sorry I was such a prick," and it had this like cactus, like sort of wallpaper in the background. And the irony was, I managed to get it hung in a gallery window right opposite where this person worked, which I thought was just so fitting. Anyway, this guy, this guy bought it, who's, like I said, a wonderful art collector, and that felt great because it was like, he's a champion of some fantastic artists that I love, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm kind of in, feel things like that make you feel really good, because that painting came from quite a sad place. I try to have humor with the things, because I don't want to hold on to sadness of stuff that's happened to me, because I'll just be sad all the time. I want to kind of be able to find the humor in situations, and it's not that I'm trying to, obviously I'm making light of that now. I'm not trying to abuse that person. That thing has long gone, and it was just a process, and I made the painting, and it's now found its forever home in this lovely art collection amongst other incredible artists. And so it's, things like that feel great. It's not ever about exposing the other people, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say, although I suppose it does to a certain extent.
But it goes off to mean something completely different to other
Yeah.
people. You created it out of what you were feeling, and that's kind of what great art is, right? It's about those they're sort of subliminal, because if I write something about my experiences, I don't know what that's going to bring up for other people.
No, exactly.
I don't expect people to be interested in what I've been through, but I do sort of create stuff in order for people to talk about and interrogate their own experiences and look at things from a different perspective.
And, shared experience is a great thing.
Yeah.
Okay, it might not be exactly the same thing, but that actually doesn't matter. Okay, you weren't the person in that story that I'm talking about, or I'm not the person in your story that you're talking about, but there'll be somebody else who's had a similar experience, and they'll have their person who's in that story. And it's like, and I often think, I spent a lot of time reading lots of things about addiction, trying to sort of understand the things around it, and it was kept, it's opposite of addiction, sobriety, and blah, 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 and all this, get clean, live clean, and, actually, it's nothing. It's everything to do with connection. People go down those roads because they don't feel connected to anybody or anything. And that can come from all sorts of reasons. But the moment you start putting connection back into lives, that's when good stuff happens, that's where the joy is.
Natalie, thank you for talking to us. Talking to us is just me today, but I've got a habit of saying us.
You're on the records. I like all the, faces behind. Looks good.
That's it, talking to me and Bob Marley and Jacques Brel.
Yeah.
That's who.
You are an open mic with an audience of one. You are an abandoned bike rusting in the lane. You are a crowded train.